G'day, Year 9 history students. I want to put together this little presentation just to talk through some of the elements of the assignment, to try and make it as clear as I can about what we have to do to be successful in the assignment. I want to start by having a look at this key part of the task. And it talks about this statement that we have to respond to in essay form. The statement is the movement from a British colony to the independent and proud nation of Australia took place at the turn of the 20th century. That's a statement of fact. Then it goes on to this second statement. This change was not a quick one, nor was it due to one singular event or factor. So, the question is, to what extent is the above statement an accurate depiction of the Federation of Australia and the events surrounding it? So, to what extent do you agree with the statement that change from becoming a colony to the proud nation of Australia was not a quick one, and that it was due to more than one event or factor? And you can argue, of course, across a continuum. However, I think most people will look at this, having read through the textbook, and say, well, there were definitely a number of events that contributed to Australia becoming a nation, and that happened over a period of time. So in this case, that would lead you to agree with this statement, that change was not quick, that it happened over time, and that was due to a number of events and factors. And that's where I wanted to start in the presentation. Having a look and checking that we understood this comment and what we're actually trying to discuss. Here's how I think most people are likely to approach this task. If you were to choose 3 events that influenced the formation of the nation Australia from that period set out in the task sheet, so 1715 to 1918, if you choose 3 events from that period of time, straight away you're showing that it's not just one single event. You're agreeing that it's a number of events. And the fact that it happens over a period of time is that you're saying that you're agreeing with this idea that it wasn't a quick change. It was a change that happened over time. And so by looking at those events and the fact that they happen over time, you are, in effect, agreeing that the statement is an accurate depiction. Now, you don't have to argue that way, but it would seem, I suspect, a lot of people will choose. Entirely up to you, but I think it's going to be a likely approach. Now, we also have to think about how we're going to approach the research task. And I've done this. I've chosen my areas of interest. So I think personally I'm going to agree with the statement that there are a number of events that influence the formation of Australia and that these happened over time. And I've chosen 2, and I've chosen 2 that aren't as common because I don't want you guys to be copying. So, obviously you can't copy what I've done and expect to get good marks. So I've chosen first settlement and the way early settlers adapted to the Australian environment. And to start the research process, I want to pose a research question. So my question, the thing I'm looking as I start the research is, how did first settlement and the way early settlers adapted to the Australian environment impact the development of Australia? Now in class today, those students who were there, they did this. If you weren't there, then that's something you can do for homework and have that ready for the next lesson. But after the research question comes your background research. So doing some reading and keeping in mind that we need sources to analyse, primary and secondary sources. Those people that started doing some writing, it's been one of the things I've seen repeatedly. They don't have the sources there. And if you don't have the sources there, you can't meet the criteria that look at how you have used those sources. So after I've done a bit of background research, I'm going to put together a hypothesis. And we'll do this again together in class, but I just want to show the whole process. So my hypothesis, having done some background research, having learned some things about the topic, is both the first settlement of Australia and the way early settlers adapted to the Australian environment were crucial and long-term causes that contributed to the development of Australia as a nation because they saw many day-to-day processes modified to suit Australian conditions. So I've put together this statement of mine, and this is now going to drive, as a hypothesis, is going to drive through research and some focus questions. So these start to become more important in terms of exactly what am I looking at in more depth. What are valuable primary and secondary sources related to first settlement and the way early settlers adapted? What was the historical background of first settlement? What had been happening in so sub-questions here from the historical background. What had been happening in Great Britain? What was happening in Australia? What were the major effects of first settlement in Australia? And what were the major development changes as early settlers adapted to the Australian environment? Now, I don't want to go into so much depth about those. We'll look at those a little bit more. What's really important now is you start with your research question and start thinking about that background research. And we'll go through these in more depth a little later on. I just want to remind people as you're going through, so now as you start to research, you do need to use sources. So be keeping the record in your research booklets as you go. Now, I emailed those booklets to everyone today. They go through some of the process, and what I want to see here, where you're talking about your topic, also have your research question here. And now you start to have that background research notes as your second step, and it flows through onto the other parts that I've talked about. But again, don't feel that you need to get ahead now. Some more information on what a hypothesis is there. One last thing. In terms of what are the topics you might choose that show how Australia's developed, I put this little presentation with just a few. There are others that you might choose. Okay. And as I said, probably a lot of people are going to choose 3. They'll have these 3 body paragraphs in their essays. You might talk about gold, the gold rush. You might talk about art and literature and the way that was changing in Australia. You might talk about a growing Australian awareness. For example, we talked about Australia Day. Or you might talk about White Australia policy. And you'll choose a number of these because remember, what you're trying to prove is that what you're likely to be arguing is that there were a number of events that contributed to the formation of Australia as a nation, and these things happened over time. Make sure if you have any questions, let us know. Another really important thing to mention is that the draft date now has been changed back to the 18th of August, and so we will be working on class just to go through this in a steady fashion. I want you to have your research question. If you're not sure, ask on Tuesday, make sure you get that done, but we'll work through those other steps as we build our draft.